everybody. I'm showing 8:05 on my clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. First, I just want to say a big welcome and thank you for coming. My name is Katy Reynolds. I'm a licensed professional counselor with ChildSavers, and also most recently became a certified trauma and resiliency practitioner. I'm super excited to be here with you guys tonight. As you come in, it should be set up so that you already are muted, but in case that's not working correctly, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and muting yourself, that'll help keep our extra noise just down to a minimum so it's a little easier to hear. And then we'll go ahead and get started. As we get into this, I first want to give a big thank you and shout out to Ernst & Young, who helped make this possible for us, and not only possible in general, but also possible to make this free to the community, which was just an amazing gift. So thank you so much, Ernst & Young, for believing in us and seeing this as a really important topic to be discussed. I want to make sure everybody's on the same page about what's included in this package, I guess I'll say, that you're getting tonight and with this series. So everybody will be getting a copy of the PowerPoint that we go over tonight. Everybody will be getting a certificate for being present tonight. And everybody will also be getting a small packet of resources to help with some continued learning around what we talk about tonight, as well as some reflection questions for you to consider and kind of help prepare for the transitions coming up. So this is our Reentry and Reopening with Children series. So in case you didn't know already, this is the first week of 3. So I hope you will join us for the other ones as well. As you can imagine, this is just a really big topic, a big conversation. So it's just far too much material for us to get through in one night. So I hope you'll join us again next week and the following week. It'll be each Thursday at 8 p.m. in this same meeting room. So you already have all the information to come and join us. If you want to make sure that you get the materials, it's really important that you also sign up with us on Eventbrite, because that's the list we're going off of to make sure that the participants for each week get all those big materials that I was talking about, of the PowerPoint, the certificate, the resources, and the reflection questions. Okay, so I want to just take a minute and start by asking you guys to just think about and contextualize transition. So if you could take a moment and imagine or draw, if you have some paper or pen or pencil nearby, a favorite memory. And we'll just take a second to kind of sit on this and let you think about it. Now that you might be holding that memory in your mind or on your paper, I wonder if you can take a second and think about what it feels like. What feelings come up for you when you think about that memory? And what might have happened right before or right after that memory? Now we're going to pivot again slightly and think about instead a difficult memory, not anything too hard. You know, this isn't therapy, but if you could take a moment and imagine or draw a memory of when a time was difficult. And again, as we sit with that memory in your mind or on your page, I want you to think about how it makes you feel and what might have happened right before or right after that memory. Now, to bring us back to the present, the reason we're doing this is because transitions are hard at any stage in life, whether they're a positive memory or a negative memory. There can be a lot of hard things associated with transitions. And it makes me wonder what kind of memories our kids are making right now as they're going through all of this. You know, they're obviously learning a lot about what's happening around them and the people around them and themselves. And it's important that when things are hard, that we remember the moments in the past that were maybe harder or better, to help us contextualize that things can be harder and better again as well. You know, so that way we're not in a space of catastrophizing this experience, which I know for me personally is very easy to do. You know, things will move forward. Things will be better at other moments, and things might be harder at other moments as well. Most likely, this is not the hardest moment that you've experienced. As we set ourselves up today, these are some of the things that we're going to be going through and talking about and learning with each other. We're going to be exploring how our kids perceive transition and what they might be considering, what we should consider about what they're considering. We're going to contextualize growth and think about big picture, what that means and how it might feel in the moment. And we're going to talk about some examples of setting expectations for transitions in a way to help make things more attainable, more achievable. And I want to just mention here for a moment that, you know, when I was preparing for tonight and thinking about what I wanted to share with you guys and what I wanted to bring to you guys, I realized that what I really wanted to bring to this space was like the silver bullet. You know what I mean? Of these are the two things you can do, and it will make this all better and easier, and it will be all sunshine and rainbows. And I realized that I think that's partly because I also really want that. And it's tough because, you know, I'm just going to shatter the glass ceiling now. That's not something that's going to happen today. I don't have a silver bullet. I'm here with you today as a parent, as a mental health professional, as a school partner, and I'm not an expert in this. You know, none of us have gone through this, but I'm here to share with you what I do know about transition and the things that I have learned in my experience that might help us through this time. So let's start with the kiddos. If your kiddo is anything like mine, you'll know they are very, very perceptive. And they know something's different, right? There's no question about that. There was a different way of life, a different way of our society, a different way of interacting with each other and our world, and it changed practically overnight. And it's been continuously different. I think for a lot longer than some of us may have thought or hoped that it was going to be. I know when I got the news that schools were shutting down, I really thought we were going to be back in a couple of weeks. You know, I was not prepared for a year plus of it being different. So there can be questions of, in a sense of, is it gone forever? Is this changed forever? Adults and kids are very different in their ability to contextualize change. And contextualizing change is really important. It allows us to do a lot of things, to tolerate pain, to work towards goals, to encourage ourselves and understand contributing factors through cause and effect. Um, you know, even that simple exercise we did at the beginning here of just kind of taking a second and putting it in perspective that this is hard. This has been hard. And we have been through hard things before, and we will persevere through hard things again in the future. And children's ability to contextualize these changes really, it changes across the lifespan, right? A preschooler's perspective of this experience is going to be much different than, for example, a fourth grader or an 11th grader. You know, a preschooler doesn't have the same gauge on time the same way that that 11th grader might. So that preschooler is going to need to have it broken down in smaller, more manageable segments of time of this is what's happening today. You know, in contrast, that 11th grader is going to maybe start to have more concept of longer time spans over years and a future and what that means and the fact that we will move past this. Because again, they've had enough time where they've moved past things before. Kids really focus on contextualizing by reading the room and the adults around them. And they've probably noticed that the adults are pretty tense because this has been really heavy for us too, and new for us too. And we're only human. So it's one of those things where it's important to keep in mind that even when we might, you know, use our words to try to comfort them, they're going to be reading a lot from our actions and the cues they're picking up from us about how we're handling the situation, how we're interacting with others throughout these situations, and probably much more so than our words. And we want to make sure that we're focusing on the next steps for kids. There's a balance here of naming and giving space for the present and acknowledging what's happening and validating and normalizing that. And then there's also a really important need to talk about what's happening next. And again, when we think about the different ages of kids that you guys might be working with in childcare centers or in schools or have in your family or home, you know that preschooler is going to need much smaller next steps of this is what's happening in the next hour. This is what's happening tonight. And that 11th grader is probably going to need some of that, but also more of the longer span. This is what's going to be happening in the next month. This is what's going to be happening in the next year. And just really getting realistic about what that might look like. I think as we talk about change and transition, it's important that we also really keep this growth mindset at heart. I love this quote. I think it is just so powerful, a really powerful perspective on what growth looks like. And this is something I see often in the work that I do. Growth is really uncomfortable. That's just the truth of it. When we're in the midst of transition and growth, it can feel really wonky. It can feel like something we want to avoid and just run away from, or it can feel like we're failing or not doing something as well as we should be doing. But really, that's part of the process. And if we don't allow space for that discomfort, for that, you know, breaking down of what we had built before, then we won't get to whatever is next, to whatever is new. You know, I wanted to kind of take a second and just pause here and check in with the room. And we've kind of talked a little bit about contextualizing transition and growth. And in just a few moments, we're going to move on to talking specifically about the transitions around the pandemic. but I wanted to just give some space and some room for if anyone had questions or a comment or a consideration that they wanted to bring up now or bring into the room. This might be a good space to do it. Feel free to put it in the chat. I'm kind of able to monitor both, or you can unmute and just share out if that feels more comfortable. Okay, I'm not hearing any needs, so we're going to kind of keep it moving. So first, before we think about looking ahead and moving forward, we need to take a second and look back, right? Because everything changed really quickly. So we really need to think about what happened and what did we learn about it? The pandemic put a lot of new demands on us. So we need to take some time and really unpack that. What demands came up? What was new? What demands maybe were positive for us in some way? And what really shook us to our core? It's important to review the events within that, the smaller steps and the smaller, what might seem like the smaller experiences within that. And I think it's also very important to talk directly with the kids about their experiences here. Sometimes as adults, it can be easy to try to use our own life experience to inform the situation and inform how we move forward in a way we feel is best. But to be the best help that we can be to the children in our lives, we need to also recruit them into the process and open up the conversation of how did they experience this? What demands did they notice change? Are there anything changes that they were happy with? I certainly was kind of surprised to see how many kiddos I work with were really happy with virtual schooling. It helped them in many ways. And so that transition back might actually be a negative for some of those kiddos or something that's unwanted. What did we get wrong in adapting to this? You know, this was a large scale, worldwide example of how people respond to stress and threat. And what we saw across the world was a huge array of how to handle it. And it's kind of interesting when we think about what might we have gotten wrong there? What might we have changed now that we can look back with that 2020 hindsight and get additional learning from? Sometimes unlearning can be just as important as actual learning. Sometimes looking at where we got it wrong and naming that, especially for our kids, because they're going to make mistakes too, right? We're not perfect. We're all kind of walking through this experience together. And trying out new things and trying to just survive it. And there's also a lot here about learning about ourselves. I think each of us individually has learned quite a bit about ourselves and the other people around us. And what did the kids learn about us? You know, they've been watching us walk through this. I hear a lot from people about the concern around what kids have been missing. Particularly when it comes to educational markers like grades and academic achievement. There's been a lot that's been missed there. But let's not pretend that they haven't been learning, right? They might not have been learning from their books the same way that they once were with their math problems and their history classes, but they have been learning from us in real time, whether we want them to or not. It's just human nature of how we develop and how we learn. By looking at the models around us. And then that brings us to looking ahead. Things are going to need to change again now. You know, there's a lot that we're going to need to consider in this. The most important thing that I think I can highlight here is a gradual return back into whatever this new normal might look like for you and your family. If we really want to avoid the sudden shifts, because that's most likely to spike a sudden stress reaction in our kids. I actually heard from, I think he was a psychologist at one point recently. He had this interesting kind of idea that maybe there could be a calculation in determining what the length of a transition could or should look like coming out of this time. And his philosophy was that you could take the square root of the length of time that the experience has been going on, and that would be about as much time as you need to transition back out of it. So when we do the math on that, this pandemic was, we'll call it about 12 months. I mean, I know we're still in it, so it's really technically a little longer than that, but we started seeing some signs of some normalcy for some families around that time. And the square root of 12 would put us around 3.5. So I want to just let you sit with that for a second. If we're thinking about how to transition back, and we're thinking about what steps need to happen within that, we're talking about over a span of around 3.5 months to transition back. And I know some of you might be sitting here and doing the math on that, and you're like, my kid's going back to full school as it used to be in September. 3.5 months counting back from that starts about next month. And I'm not suggesting that you don't have fun over the summer, that you don't take the breaks that you need to break. But what I am suggesting is that some of the pieces to transition that we know will help make it more gradual, things like routine, things like consistency, things like relationship building, let's go ahead and start doing that now, right? So, the routine parts are pieces like sleep and bedtimes, making sure you eat at certain times of day. Our schedules have really kind of gone all over the place. For ourselves, for parents, thinking about things like traffic and incorporating a little extra time and making sure that you have time in your morning routines and your morning commutes. When we think about predicting challenges, it's tough. It's really tough. And our younger kids need to hear from us what our predictions are, what our experiences are here, in order to help set and establish their own. So you don't have to be right. Nobody's asking you to be perfect, but it's a consideration of, oh, this might happen, or maybe this is what it will look like. Older children tend to show a little bit more bias in that because of their stage of development. They push back a little bit on the adults in their life, and to have more of that individual self that's coming out and that they're practicing and working with. That's normal, and we don't want to go against that grain. We just want to allow space for it. Their predictions might be different than ours, and that's okay. We want to help them set those appropriate, reasonable expectations. That starts with you as a caregiver. Again, thinking about what does your child need, or the children in your life need, and really starting from a space of biology. Normally when we talk about that, I think everybody knows that, for example, you need breaks to eat and you need breaks to sleep, but sometimes things that get missed are things like we need time outside in the sun, and we need time to move, and we need time to socialize with others. That's true for our children, and it's also, of course, true for ourselves. We need to really, assess how the demands have changed on kids and us in this way, and just reassess and try to mitigate the demands where possible. This is where that focus on catching up would be a mistake. It makes sense that, given the year that we've had, kids are not where they may have been had the pandemic not happened. But unfortunately, we do not have the ability to wave a magic wand and change this. It's something that we're in, it's something that we have to walk through. So now that we're here, let's kind of reassess and figure out what the big needs are. And it really comes down to consistency and showing up and building those relationships and that space to connect and walk through it together, opening up that conversation. Healing really happens in the relationship. And when we say healing, I really want to emphasize that it's about social connection and stability, and telling and reminding someone that I'm here to listen, and I'm here to listen to you as you experience this. If we criticize a reaction, that just breeds shame, and we really can't recover that way. So it's not about right or wrong. It's just about validating that everyone has walked through this differently and giving space for that and time for that. And the end, we really just, all of us, but especially our kids, really need time and need to be heard with a positive framing of their experience. So we know all the negative stuff. We know that a lot has happened. But what are the positives that have happened here? What can we name and what can we point to? Where's the growth? Can we find that opportunity, and can we name it and bring it out and celebrate it? This feels like another spot where it might be good for us to just pause and check in and see if there are questions or considerations. I see that something has come up in the chat here, a question about, will we cover topics that incorporate other life events during the pandemic? I have a teen experiencing loss of a parent. I'm wondering, Ms. Woodson, if you could unmute yourself and just speak a little bit more to your question here so that I can get a feel for what you're looking for. Okay. I'm not hearing Ms. Woodson, so I'm going to kind of guess. So I might not be 100% here, but I think that this speaks to really what we're talking about here, that other life events have happened, and a lot of grief and loss has happened in this time. I mean, really, if we think about it, this whole experience has been grief and loss in a big way. And then in smaller ways, and very real ways, people have lost real figures in their life, as this example with Miss Woodson here. And so I think giving a space to honor that and validate that, and hear from the child what their experience is of it. It's not something that we can pass over. It's not something that we can fix. It's just something that we have to sit with them in and leave space for. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure. Are there any other questions or concerns or considerations? Okay. Well, I'll be honest with you guys, we're flying through this. I don't know if it's just I'm talking about it differently than I had originally planned to, but we don't have a ton left. So this might be a shorter night this week. But I do want to take a few minutes and give you some time to reflect on and share out on, if you're willing to do so, with some reflection questions here. So I'm going to give some space for us to just think about these and think about the smaller action steps within them. Like a funny example I always think of is the pandemic, caused a lot of us to start working from home. And like for me, I know that meant I could start wearing yoga pants and sweatpants much more frequently, but that's going to need to change again now. But there are much smaller steps underneath there, and other bigger considerations as well. So I'm just going to give a few moments here, and then we'll have some time to kind of share out and connect on this.
I might share that for my experience,
Sure.
I'm a preschool teacher and pre-K teacher, and it has been a big change in many senses, because first of all we had to learn to use more technology and use devices and get adapted and learn fast,
Mhm.
things that maybe would have taken for most of us a long period of time. I think we had to learn within a week how to use all these Zoom meets and Google Classroom and all these techniques for teaching. And it also brought good things, because I can think that it was an opportunity for me to be working and having my children at home. And I'm a single mom, and that was a gift. It was something beautiful that I could sit down with my college son and my high school son on a long table, and the three of us being working at the same time. And that was a great chance to be together and to do more family things, and value that those moments, that maybe if we never gone through this, we would have never experienced something like that. Um, so I think, as far as I'm in Texas, so we've been in school since August. I've been working, and I'm physically there. My children have been on a hybrid system where sometimes they go and sometimes they can stay, and it has been a great change. And there's been many things, challenges, in the sense that sometimes, because you're not going to school physically or to work physically, the tendency might be to be lazy and stay just relaxed. But then it was also a chance for me as a mom to go out with them and ride a bicycle or go for walks and doing stuff that it was really amazing. And seeing my kids in the classroom, it was challenging for them because they're so young and they get used to having their parents all the time, being there, feeling protected. It is amazing how a 4-year-old can understand perfectly that we're going on a pandemic and that there's a virus. And those words, I don't even think that they were in my brain until I was much older. So I think this generation is very resilient, and we were all like forced to move forward, because if you don't do it, then you get stuck or you get so depressed, and it would be miserable. I think, um, overall we can try to make it positive. We've had many people who lost their lives with the pandemic, but still we're here, we're alive. So I think there's bad, but there's been also a lot of good things. And it demanded from us getting out of a comfort zone.
Ah, yeah, that is so real. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like I can connect with so much of what you're saying, particularly the getting out of the comfort zone part. I wonder if there's others in the room that can also connect with what you're saying here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. For me, early on in the pandemic, I had to make a decision to to let my assistant go. Uh, we had to shut down basically for 8 weeks, and that was kind of, oh my, will we ever open again? So just that anxious feeling and the change in the workplace. So we opened again, but there's been a shift in responsibilities. And I did not bring my assistant back, and she could not come back based on what was going on in her own personal life. So my responsibilities have increased dramatically in order to, continue caring for children. But it's okay, but it's just still a different experience. And I'm still adjusting to that, to tell you the truth. I really am. it's a lot more work and longer hours, and it's quite demanding, and I think, and I'm not just saying physically, under the pandemic, there's stress. So we're dealing with emotional baggage, mental, just the whole gamut. And some things don't even have a name. I can't even describe, what it's been like and what it is. I'm very thankful, though, to be able to serve and to be there for the parents that do need care. And the interesting part is that many of my parents are working from home, but you still need care. That's an interesting part where you think, oh, well, you're at home and you can care for your child, but you can't do that. You still need childcare.
Yeah.
And so, that's a realization that today it's a different way of looking at childcare, the whole concept of childcare. We have women who are working at home, but they still need care. And a lot of people don't understand that. They just don't get it. But it's true, and I think that's just something that we as women have to carry that forth ourselves to explain, to those who don't understand, why do you need childcare? You're at home working, but we do.
Yeah. Again, so real. Thank you so much for sharing. Gosh, as soon as you started talking about that, I was like, well, number one, it just kind of breaks my heart to know that one of the things that came for you was not just demands that happened, but then also the demands just kept increasing. And so perhaps the change that needs to happen now is, figuring out how to fill your cup more, or I don't know if it's possible to take any of the demands off. It sounds like not really, but gosh, I really connect with what you're saying about parents too. I was one of those mamas who at the start of this was very anxious. My child had just turned 1 year old. And so we pulled her out of childcare that she was in, that we loved, but we just weren't sure at that point what was going on. And so I was one of those parents that attempted to do both roles at once, and did so for a couple of months, and almost lost my mind because you're exactly right. It's just not really possible. In our brains, maybe there's some imaginary world where that works out, but in reality, a 13-month-old plus, a full-time job working with kids in a therapeutic setting is not going to work out well. No. I wonder too, I imagine there are others who can connect with what you're saying here as well. Is there anybody else in the room who might want to step in and share a bit?
I think for us, that one of the things with the pandemic was, dealing with, we have 2 sons and they're different ages, but then also going through a health crisis during the pandemic. So, we're at home and we're trying to manage their schedules and keep them on track with school, but then also like fearful, are we making the right decision and not letting them go back to school because one, it's not safe because of the pandemic, but then also the health risks, to a family member. So that became a lot on top of just like, everything that we're doing. And so now as we're starting to think moving forward, now there's like that kind of fear of reintroducing them back into the world because, now they've been home, with us for, more than a year, and just all the different things that they've had to experience being so young, not just with going through a pandemic, but just personally in our family life. And then now the idea of them having to go back out into the world to school. So there's like that fear there. So just trying to figure out how do we navigate that as we move forward.
Yeah, that's huge. And I'm so glad you brought that forward, because I think this is a really common one that has come up for a lot of folks, and that a lot of people are going to need to consider as we adjust back. you know, the reality, the context of this crisis and this pandemic was such that we did develop fear of each other, right? Being around each other or near others, particularly from outside of our homes, was deemed unsafe for a really long time. And so to protect ourselves, one thing that the pandemic demanded of us was to take that space and extra precautions, and always kind of thinking about how to maintain safety, because safety comes first. And now we're walking into an area where we're asking ourselves and we're asking our kids to re-enter the society, hopefully as it once was, in some way of being together and coming together from outside of our homes. And so that's a very real challenge, right? We just kind of built in this fear, this need, this demand in order to maintain safety for ourselves and our loved ones. And now we're asking them to unlearn that. And, you know, just as we talked about earlier tonight, that's not something we're just going to be able to tell them to do. And it's not going to be something that's going to happen in 1 week. It's going to be something that needs to be talked about, validated, normalized, and there's going to need to be small building steps back up to where that, you know, goal space might be, whatever that is for you guys and your family, re-entering school, you know, re-entering the workforce, whatever it might be, and taking baby steps with it. You know, I've heard from folks who already had social anxiety. This has really just like exacerbated it. But folks who didn't have any history of that are really experiencing some of those sensations now of when you get out in public, it feels really uncomfortable. And again, it's totally valid and it's normal given the circumstances that we've gone through here to expect that. And so it's just about giving ourselves space and time and small steps to kind of gain the skills to get back there. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that and bringing light to that. I think that's a really relatable example. I'm wondering if anyone else wants to kind of share out tonight. We do have a few moments left. Okay. I'm not hearing anything, and it sounds like we've kind of had our space. We've run through it a little bit quickly, but this was kind of the first step, as I mentioned, in our puzzle. You know, just really thinking about contextualizing transition and really putting some steps to the thought processes and the reflections we need to do behind that. Next week and the following week, we're going to get more into some of the actionable steps, some of the meat underneath of the transition that we need to consider. So next week, I invite you to join us. We'll be talking about child development during transitions in particular. And then week 3, we'll be talking about some social emotional skill building and how adults in kids' lives really function as the model for how kids learn those skills and what we can do to help them strengthen and develop them to help them prepare for these transitions that they're going through. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and just give a big thank you for joining us tonight.